Good afternoon. Today's talk will be on the prose that was written during the Romantic Age, and by prose we mean both fictional prose as well as non fictional prose. To begin with the fictional prose first, the death of Tobias Smollett in 1771 brought an end to the first great period of novel writing in English. It was not until the appearance of Jane Austen's Sense and Sensibility in 1811 and Sir Walter Scott's Waverley in 1814 would there be again works of prose fiction which ranked with the masterpieces of Richardson, Fielding, Sterne, and Smollett of the previous era. It is possible to suggest practical reasons for this nearly 40-year eclipse of prose writing. The war with France made paper expensive, causing publishers in the 1790s and early 1800s to prefer short, dense forms such as poetry. It might also be argued that in more broadly cultural terms, the comic and realistic qualities of the novel were at odds with the new sensibility of Romanticism. But the problem was always one of quality rather than quantity. Flourishing as a form of entertainment, the novel nevertheless underwent several important developments in this period. One was the invention of the Gothic novel. Another was the appearance of a politically engaged fiction in the years immediately before the French Revolution. A third was the rise of women writers to the prominence that they have held ever since in prose fiction. The sentimental tradition of Richardson and Sterne persisted significantly until the 1790s with Henry Brooks' novel The Fool of Quality. It was published in 1770. Henry Mackenzie's The Man of Feeling and Charles Lamb's A Tale of Rosamund Grey and Old Blind Margaret, 1798. Novels of this kind were, however, increasingly mocked at in the later years of the 18th century. The comic realism of Fielding and Smollett continued in a more sporadic way. John Moore, for example, gave a cosmopolitan flavor to the worldly wisdom of his predecessors in his novels Zelluco and Mordaunt, published in 1800. Fanny Burney carried the comic realist manner into the field of female experience with novels such as Evelina, Cecilia, and Camilla. A discovery of the comic and didactic potential of a plot, charting a woman's progress from the nursery to the altar, would be important for several generations of female novelists. More striking than these continuations of previous modes, however, was Horace Walpole's invention in The Castle of Otranto, published in 1764, of what became known as the Gothic novel. Walpole's intention was apparently to blend the fantastic plot of ancient romance with the realistic characterization of the modern romance or novel. Characters would respond with terror to extraordinary events, and readers would vicariously participate while reading such works. Walpole's innovation was not significantly imitated until the 1790s, when, perhaps because of the violence of the French Revolution and the violence that it created a taste for correspondingly extreme forms of fiction, and a torrent of such works appeared. The most important writer of these stories was Anne Radcliffe, who distinguished between terror and horror. According to her, terror expands the soul by its use of uncertainty and obscurity. Horror, on the other hand, was actual and specific. Radcliffe's own novels, especially The Mysteries of Udolpho and The Italian, were vivid examples of the fiction of terror. Vulnerable heroines trapped in ruined castles are terrified by supernatural perils that prove to be illusions. Matthew Lewis, by contrast, wrote the fiction of horror. In The Monk, published in 1796, the hero, for example, commits both murder and incest, and the repugnant details include a woman's imprisonment in a vault full of rotting human corpses. Some later examples of Gothic fiction have more sophisticated agendas. For example, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein or The Modern Prometheus, published in 1818, is a novel of ideas that anticipates the science fiction of later generations. James Hogg's The Private Memoirs and Confessions of a Justified Sinner, published in 1824, is a subtle study of religious mania and even split personality. Even in its more vulgar examples, however, Gothic fiction can symbolically address serious political and psychological issues. By the 1790s, realistic fiction had acquired a polemical role, reflecting the ideas of the French Revolution through sacrificing much of its comic power in the process. One practitioner of this type of fiction was Robert Beach, who is best remembered for Hamsprung, or Man as He Is Not, in which a natural hero rejects the conventions of the contemporary society. The radical Thomas Holcroft published two novels, Annas and Ives and The Adventures of Hugh Trevor, influenced by the ideas of William Godwin. Godwin himself produced the best example of this political fiction in Things as They Are, or The Adventures of Caleb Williams, published in 1794, borrowing techniques from the Gothic novel to enliven a narrative of social oppression. Women novelists contributed extensively to this ideological debate of the time. Radicals such as Mary Wollstonecraft, with her works Maria or the Wrongs of Women, Elizabeth Inchbald's Nature and Art, and Mary Hayes' Memoirs of Emma Courtney, celebrated the rights of the individual. Anti-Jacobin novelists such as Jane West, Amelia Opie, and Mary Brompton stressed the dangers of social change. Some writers, however, were more bipartisan, notably Elizabeth Hamilton in her Memoirs of Modern Philosophers, published in 1800, and Maria Edgeworth, whose long, varied and distinguished career extended from Letters for Literary Ladies, 1795, to Helen, 1834. Her pioneering regional novel, Castle Racket, published in 1800, is an affectionately comic portrait of life in 18th century Ireland, influenced by the subsequent works of Walter Scott. Jane Austen stands on the conservative side of this battle of ideas, though in novels that incorporate their anti-Jacobin and anti-romantic views so subtly into love stories that many readers are unaware of them. Three of her novels, namely Sense and Sensibility, Pride and Prejudice, and Northanger published in 1817, were drafted in the late 1790s. Three more novels of hers, Mansfield Park, Emma, and Persuasion, together with Northanger Abbey, were written between 1811 and 1870. Jane Austen uses essentially two standard plots. In one of the plots, we find a right-minded but neglected heroine is gradually acknowledged to be correct by characters who have previously looked down upon her, such as Fanny Price in Mansfield Park and Anne Elliot in Persuasion. In the other, an attractive but self-deceived heroine, such as Emma Woodhouse in Emma or Elizabeth Bennet in Pride and Prejudice, belatedly recovers from a condition of errors and mistaken identities or mistaken judgments of characters and is rewarded with the partner she had previously despised or overlooked. On this slight framework, Austen constructs a powerful case for the superiority of the Augustan virtues of common sense, empiricism, and rationality to the new romantic values of imagination, egotism, and subjectivity. With Austen, the comic brilliance and exquisite narrative construction of Fielding returned to the English novel in conjunction with a distinctive and deadly irony. Thomas Love Peacock is another witty novelist who combined an intimate knowledge of romantic ideas with a satirical attitude toward them. Though in comic debates rather than conventional narratives, like Headlong Hall, Melincourt, and Nightmare Abbey are sharp accounts of contemporary intellectual and cultural fashions, as are the two much later fictions in which Peacock reused his successful formula, namely Crochet Castle, published in 1831, and Crile Grange, published in 1860. Sir Walter Scott is the English writer who can be in the fullest sense be called a romantic novelist. After a successful career as a poet, Scott switched to prose fiction in 1814 with the first of the Waverley novels. In the first phase of his work as a novelist, Scott wrote about the Scotland of the 17th and 18th centuries, charting its gradual transition from a feudal era into the modern world in a series of vivid dramas. Waverley, 1814, Guy Mannering, 1815, The Antiquary, 1816, Old Mortality, again 1816, Rob Roy, 1817, and The Heart of Midlothian, 1818, are usually considered as masterpieces of romantic fiction. In the second phase of his career, beginning with Ivanhoe, published in 1819, Scott turned to stories set in medieval England. Finally, with Quentin Durward, in 1823, he added European settings to his historical repertoire. Scott combines a capacity for comic social observation with a romantic sense of landscape and an epic grandeur, enlarging the scope of the novel in ways that equip it to become the dominant literary form of the later 19th century. Now, alongside the growth of the novel or the fictional works, Romantic period saw a significant surge in the number of essays or non-fictional tracts, perhaps motivated significantly by the French Revolution and its basis in social and political principles and impassioned use of words or phrases or language in order to put forth the view. Significant works of the non-fictional writings of the Romantic period include Mary Wollstonecraft's A Vindication of the Rights of Men and A Vindication of the Rights of Women, the latter of which is an important early statement of feminist issues that gained greater recognition in the subsequent century. The Romantic emphasis on individualism is significantly reflected in much of the prose of the period, particularly in criticism and the familiar essays. Among the various vigorous writings is that of William Hazlitt, a forthright and subjective critic whose most characteristic work is seen in his collection of lectures titled On the English Poets, 1818, On the English Comic Writers, 1819, and In the Spirit of the Age, 1825, a series of valuable portraits of his contemporaries. In the Essays of Failure and Last Essays of Elia, Charles Lamb, an even more personal essayist, projects with apparent artlessness a carefully managed portrait of himself, charming, whimsical, witty, sentimental, and nostalgic. As his fine letters show, however, he could on occasion produce modern satire as well. Mary Russell Minford's Our Village, 1832, is another example of the charm and humor of the familiar essay in this period. Thomas De Quincey appealed to the new interest in writing about the self, producing a colorful account of his early experiences in Confessions of an English Opium Eater. which was written in 1821 and subsequently revised and enlarged much later in 1856. His unusual gift of evoking states of dream and nightmare is best seen in essays such as The English Mail Coach and On the Knocking at the Gate in Macbeth. His essay on murder, considered as one of the fine arts, is an important anticipation of the Victorian aesthetic movement. Walter Savage Landor's detached, lapidary style is seen at its best in some brief lyrics and a series of erudite imaginary conversations which began to appear in 1824. The critical discourse of the era was dominated by the Whig Quarterly, the Edinburgh Review, begun in 1802, edited by Francis Jeffrey, and its Tory rivals, the Quarterly Review, which began in 1809, and also the monthly Blackwood's Magazine, begun in 1817. Through their attacks on contemporary writers, which could be savagely partisan, they set notable standard of fearless and independent journalism. Similar independence was shown by Leigh Hunt, whose outspoken journalism, particularly in his Examiner, another periodical begun in 1808, was of wide influence, and by William Cobbett, whose Rural Rights gives a telling picture in forceful and clear prose of the English countryside of the day. Introspection was inevitable in the literature of an immediately post-Romantic period, and the age itself was as prone to self-analysis as were its individual writers. Hazlitt's essay, In the Spirit of the Age, published in 1825, were echoed by Mill's articles of the same title in 1831, by Thomas Carlyle's essays, Signs of the Times and Characteristics, and by Richard Henry Horne's New Spirit of the Age, published in 1844. This persistent scrutiny was the product of an acute sense of change. Britain had emerged from the long war with France, which lasted till 1815, as a great power and as the world's predominant economy. Visiting England in 1847, the American writer, for example, Emerson, observed of the English that, he said, the modern world is theirs, they have made it a day. This new status as the world's first urban and industrialized society was responsible for the extraordinary wealth, vitality and self-confidence of the period. About these energies expressed themselves in the growth of the British Empire. At home, they were accompanied by rapid social changes and a fierce intellectual controversy. The juxtaposition of this new industrial wealth with a new kind of urban poverty is only one of the paradoxes that characterize this long and diverse period. In religion, the climax of the evangelical revival coincided with an unprecedentedly severe set of challenges to faith. The idealism and transcendentalism of Romantic thought were challenged by the growing prestige of empirical science and utilitarian moral philosophy, a process that encouraged more subjective modes in literature. This is all that I had to tell you with regard to a review of the prose works that were written during the Romantic age. Thank you.